Several years ago, we were driving through a parking lot. You've probably all done that as well. We're driving through, and where we lived, it was, I think, maybe like a Walmart or something, but it was just like always crowded, no matter what. And we're driving through, we're trying to find a spot. We can't find a spot, of course. Driving up and down the aisles, looking, can't find anything. Finally, what we see happen is like we're coming around a turn, about to head down another aisle, and we see a car backing up. First, like I had is like backup lights on, which are like, please actually be backing up. Yeah, it was. It was backing out of the spot. And it wasn't just like any spot. It was like what we call in our family the spot of glory. It's the spot that is like right up front. The spot that is like just so perfect and ideal that you don't have to walk barely. You just kind of like go across and you're there. You're inside. It was that spot. And we see it open up. We're like, yes, this is perfect. This is awesome. We pull into it. It's ours. And meanwhile, we had Melina at the time. She was probably maybe 4 or 5. And as we're pulling into this spot from the back seat, we hear this little cute voice say, "Thanks, God." We kind of like look back and we're like, oh, like, what was that? And she's like, well, we have a spot. And so I was thanking God. It's like, wow, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good idea to have of something like this. When we have something to be thankful for, thank God. Now, I was thinking about this because you could say, like, well, it's just a parking spot. Is it really that big of a deal? But what does it say in James 1:17? It says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. I felt like that parking spot was a pretty good gift. We were in a rush. We had to get going. We were trying to find a spot, and there it was. Now, it took not Megan or myself, but our little 4 or 5-year-old to recognize. Now, I have to say, in that situation, I was thankful for that spot, but my daughter actually gave thanks. I'm calling this little talk tonight, More Than Thankful, because I want us to understand the difference between thankful and thanksgiving. So let's start where I always like to start, some definitions. First off, thankful. Definition of thankful is to be conscious of a benefit received. When we saw that spot, Megan and I both were conscious that this is like a benefit. This is great. We're close to the store. This is going to be so much faster. This is awesome. We were conscious. Now, thanksgiving means the act of giving thanks. That's what Melina did. She actually gave thanks. We were thankful. We felt it. She actually gave thanks. So what I'm trying to say is you can be thankful without giving thanks. I don't know about you guys, but like for Thanksgiving dinner, we sit around the table, and my parents would always say, okay, let's all go around and I'll say something that we're thankful for. So we'd say like, family, friends, this, that, whatever it might be. We'd always go around and say something we're thankful for. I never really thought, though, of like actually not just being thankful, but of actually giving thanks. That's what that day is called. It's called Thanksgiving. It's not called Thankful Day. Thanksgiving, to actually give thanks. As we're talking about this, I'm going to go through a few points that I want us to think about when we talk about being more than thankful. First off, I want us to recognize that our attitude matters. When it comes to thankful or being more than thankful, your attitude matters. Now, I know I've said this so many times, and I'll keep on saying it. Eventually, you're going to be tired of it, but that's all part of my plan. Because sometime when you're like, man, we have heard Pastor Michael say this next thing I'm going to put on there so many times, we could recite it. Exactly. That's what I'm going for. What do I always say? What you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you act. So what we think is going to affect how we feel, and how we feel is going to affect how we act. So if we are feeling thankful or thinking it, that's good. A good place to start. It should then lead us to be thankful, to express thanksgiving, to have an attitude that is thankful. So your attitude matters. Now, once more, this is so much more than just like the optimist versus the pessimist thing. We've talked about this a lot too, but it's important to understand. Go for some definitions again. The definition of optimism is to anticipate the best possible outcome. So you might be someone who that's what you do. You always are anticipating the best possible outcome. I can think of no better person to represent this than my wife, Megan. The optimist. Always the best possible outcome. And not only like what I think like, here's the best thing that could happen. Megan is like, takes it to a whole like 100th level. I might think like, hey, maybe it'll be nice weather today. She's like, yeah. And then maybe we'll win the lottery, and maybe we'll get a new car, and maybe this, all these amazing things. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of any of that. Best possible outcome. So, of course, no surprise, pessimism is to anticipate the worst possible outcome. Now, personally, I've said this before too, I think for most things, somewhere in the middle is probably good. I don't know who said it, but I like to call this Michaelism, to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Some smart person said that somewhere along the lines. That's my strategy. Hope for the best, sure, but let's be prepared for the worst. Somewhere in the middle. Again, you find your own place. But we're not just talking about optimism versus pessimism when it comes to attitude. Because, even if you have a disposition like me, maybe a little more pessimistic, you can still be thankful. You can still give thanks. That's what we're saying when we say the attitude matters. So we're not called to expect the best. We're not called to expect the worst. What are we called to do? Well, let's look at Philippians. Philippians 4:4. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Now, I knew that using some verses from Philippians, we're doing that on Sunday morning, we're using Philippians. I'm like, well, I'm going to steal someone's thunder a little bit. And then I looked, and it turns out I'm going to be preaching on this section in just a few weeks. So, spoiler, you're going to get a little sneak preview here. Because when it comes to this idea of rejoice, we're said to rejoice always. Always. Every situation. There's no caveat there. There's no except when this. There's no exception clause. It's just always. Rejoice in the Lord always. And I feel like Paul was probably even thinking add a pause for dramatic effect. Rejoice in the Lord always. And people's minds are like, yeah, but what about, I'll say it again, rejoice. Always. You might be thinking that's impossible, but it's not saying to be happy in every situation, because that is impossible. It's saying to rejoice. So what that means is that rejoicing must be a choice. And rejoice just basically means to be full of joy. That means that must be a choice. Otherwise, we wouldn't be told to do it. Now, happiness is a feeling that is dependent on your circumstances. So that's not really a choice. Something good happens, you're just happy naturally. Joy or rejoicing is different. We can't control our circumstances, but we can control how we respond to them. Your attitude. Your attitude matters. So we need to recognize that God's at work, that He's in control, no matter what, and rejoice at that. Choose to have joy. Not sometimes, but always. So having a thankful attitude, that's huge. It's a place to start. But we also have to give thanks. So our second point, giving thanks matters. Your attitude matters and giving thanks matters. Now we know that we have a society and a culture that's really based on never having enough. No matter what you have, it is never enough. I think I told you before there was a survey done where they asked people from all different income levels, what would it mean to have enough money? And pretty much all of them said to double what they had. So if they're making $30,000 a year, if I had about 60, that'd be enough. People that are making 100,000 a year, if I just had 200, that'd be enough. There's never a point where we really feel like we're enough because we always want more. No matter what you have, there's always something better. Think about it. Every single year, there's a new model of a phone, a new model of an iPad, a new model of a computer. There's always something better. Now, I had a friend, this is interesting, he needed a new TV. Well, I shouldn't say needed. Do we need a TV? Not really. Okay, his TV was very old. It's not like this one, but it was pretty close. It was pretty old, and he could get a new one, and he had the finances to get a new one, and there's new ones out there. And so we always asked him, when are you going to get a new one? The reason he hadn't yet, though, is he says, well, no matter what, if I get a new one now, there's going to be a new one, right away. So he just kept waiting. We're like, well, what are you waiting for, though? Because that's the law of technology. There's always a new one. There's always a better one. It just constantly happens. He just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. Technology is going to keep advancing. That's how it works. I remember as a kid, it's there's always a better toy. Now as an adult, there's always a new model of a car, or a new model of a phone, like I said, or a new model of something. There's always something new. And we're kind of known today as a throwaway generation. In years past, it used to be that things were made and they would last as long as they're useful. So you'd see these things that would be passed down, family heirlooms, and then those would be used. Now, really, we have things that last until we're done with them, until we don't want it anymore, until we don't need it anymore, until we're just I'll get something else. When I was a kid, really, really little, my dad worked at a TV repair shop. Let me say that again. A TV repair shop. If your TV, something happened, you would take it to this shop and they would repair it. Now, if something happens to your TV, what do? We throw it out and then we buy a new one. Things have changed so much. So what we need to do is we need to actively shift our focus off of things that we don't have and shift our focus onto the things that we do have and to see the many, many good things that we have. But even that's not enough. Just being thankful is not enough. We also need to give thanks. Look at what it says in Philippians 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. With thanksgiving, giving thanks. And do you see that, like, the certainty of each of these verses I've been using here? So James 1:17 says, every good gift is from God. Not some, every. Philippians 4:4 said, rejoice when you feel like it. Rejoice when you want to. No, rejoice always. And now Philippians 4:6 said, in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. In everything. So thankful is good, but giving thanks is even better, because when we give thanks to God, we're recognizing that He's always good. We're recognizing that we have reasons to rejoice. Always. But let me also make clear that disappointment matters. Disappointment matters too. I'm not saying that life's always wonderful, that it's always going to feel great. I'm not even saying that you're always going to feel like giving thanks, because that's not true. And the verse doesn't say to give thanks when we feel like it. It just says in everything to give thanks. So do disappointing things happen? Yeah, absolutely they do. They always will. It's part of life that there's disappointment. And I think about it this way. I think there's a formula for disappointment. And I'm not good at math, but I understand this formula. See, so if your expectations are really high, but then if the reality of what actually happens is lower than those expectations, that's where we get disappointment. So the bigger that gap, the bigger the disappointment. If your expectations are sky high and reality is a lot lower, there's going to be a lot of disappointment involved. I mentioned that, recently we were on a vacation. We don't go on vacations a lot. And in fact, we've never gone to visit my sister in Ohio. So they've lived there for like 3 years. We finally planned to do it. And our expectations kept just getting higher and higher and higher. And here's why. First off, we're going to this place we've never been. That's exciting. We're going to have fun. We just get to get away for a little while. That's going to be nice too. But then, not only we're going to go visit my sister and her family, but my parents were moving from California to this same exact town in Ohio. So we're going to see them when we get there. And while we're there, it'll be Melina's birthday. And so my parents are going to surprise her, going to show up on her birthday in Ohio of all places. Expectations getting higher and higher. Not only that too, but my sister was telling us that the street they live on, it's like one of the most popular like trick-or-treating streets. We're going to be there over Halloween. And people come from all over the place to go on this street because they're giving out like full-size candy bars. It's just like, it's amazing. It's going to be awesome. We're talking about restaurants we're going to go to, coffee shops we're going to visit, bookstores we're going to go to, museums, all this stuff that we love to do. I mean, this was going to be pretty great. And then we get COVID, and we stay inside the whole time. So I have to admit, there was a little bit that I spent some time sulking in disappointment. Just like, man, this is the worst. We came all this way. We paid all this money just to sit in a house. But then my perspective shifted. And I was able to think about it. And actually, if you have to quarantine for 10 days, a planned vacation is a pretty good time to do that. Because it wasn't like an unexpected absence, like things were planned out. Like I knew I was going to be gone, so the things were prepared. And not only that, but like the whole youth staff team, like they stepped up, they just took care of everything. Like they were amazing. So there's all these things that I saw I could be thankful for. And two, we were forced to rest. Normally vacation, you go away. When we do go on a vacation, we're just running around, we're doing all this stuff, and we come back, we don't really feel any more rested. Like we need a vacation from the vacation. But we were forced to sit in a house and do nothing. We didn't see how much we needed that, but God did. So more and more, the disappointment didn't go away, but we were able to see things to be thankful for, to give thanks. And in disappointment, it shouldn't drive us away from God. It should drive us to God. So giving thanks reminds us about all the things we have to give thanks for. Really what we're talking about is the fact that perspective matters. Perspective matters. Well-known verse, Romans 8:28 says, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So yes, sometimes there are things that are going to be disappointing, but God can use it for good. Now, what's our perspective about what good is? We think of good as being like our own comfort, something that we want, something that we like. But God doesn't care necessarily as much about our comfort as he cares about our conformity. Because there's a verse right after Romans 8:28, Romans 8:29, and it talks about this. I love like sequel verses. There's like the verse that we all know it's really popular, and like then the next verse no one really knows. And this is the case with Romans 8:29, I think. So Romans 8:28, God works all things for good. Romans 8:29 says, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. Now, most often this verse is used to argue, predestined. What does that mean? I think they're missing the point. Because verse 28 says, God works all things for good. And then verse 29 says what God considers good. God works all things for good to conform us to the image of his son, Jesus. If you get nothing else out of this, this is what I want you to get. God's definition of good is to conform you to be more like Jesus. And whatever it takes for that to happen, he can use anything to accomplish that. Good, bad, everything in between. He wants to conform you to be more like Jesus because he knows that's what's best for you and that's what you need. So we shouldn't just be looking at things saying okay, God, get me through this, get me out of this. But sometimes we have to say, God, what are you doing in this time? And even in those times, we can give thanks. Good or bad, whatever you're going through right now, no matter what it is, how might God use that to be making you more like his son? That's what we're talking about. I was talking to Pastor Will about this subject, and he brought up the story of Jesus in the 10 lepers. So the story goes, there's these 10 lepers, and leprosy back in the first century, it was bad, right? It was the worst thing that could happen. And there's these 10 lepers who they can't be with their family. They just can't even go and my computer died apparently. Anyways, we're going. They can't be with their family. They can't have a job. They can't interact in society. There's just nothing that they can do because they have leprosy. So Jesus heals them. He says, okay, go show yourself to the priest. So they go, they take off, and it says that there's one then who notices that he's been healed. So he turns around and he goes back, and it says that he give thanks to Jesus. And then Jesus kind of says, okay, I'm glad you came back, but it's interesting that you came back, and there were 10. So one gave thanks, but there was 10 that were healed. Now, I'm sure all 10 of those lepers were very thankful. I'm sure they were aware of the benefit that they had received. But only one thought to give thanks. Just like when we were in that parking lot, and my daughter, Melina, was the one who gave thanks, when Meg and I both felt thankful, sure, but she gave thanks. Now, it's almost Thanksgiving. There's nothing really sacred about that day. It's a day that comes and that we've set aside to give thanks, but it's not like it's a biblical command or anything. It's just a day that we have. But it is an opportunity to help us remember the importance of giving thanks. It's an opportunity that we can set aside and say, okay, what are all the things I can be thankful for? And then let me actually give thanks to God for those things. Being thankful is a great start, but we need to be more than thankful. We need to let that lead us to actually give thanks to God.